Half the plot holes in those YouTube videos aren't plot holes at all. They're explained in the books, in the comics, or, and this is the embarrassing part, by just watching the movie carefully. But the other half? Those are in the sequel trilogy, and those are different. See, there's this cottage industry of content creators who figured out that slapping plot holes on a thumbnail gets clicks. Easy content, low effort. Film some reaction footage, read a Reddit thread, collect your ad revenue. The problem is, most of them haven't actually done the homework. They haven't read the novelizations. They haven't touched the reference guides. They haven't cracked open the Visual Dictionaries or the Incredible Cross-Sections series or any of the Timothy Zahn novels that built this universe into something coherent. They haven't even rewatched the scenes they're criticizing closely enough to notice that the answer was sitting right there in the dialogue the whole time. The viewers already know this. That's why they flood comment sections with corrections. That's why a significant portion of engagement on these videos consists of people pointing out what the creator missed. That's why "tell me you haven't read the books" became the go-to response. So let's do something different. Let's sort the supposed plot holes into two categories: the fake ones that have always had answers, and the real ones that are genuinely broken. And then let's notice something interesting about where each category clusters. The Kessel Run. Every amateur critic's favorite gotcha. Han Solo brags that the Millennium Falcon made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, and immediately, someone raises their hand to point out that parsecs measure distance, not time. George Lucas must have made a mistake. Han Solo is bad at science. The whole line is nonsense. Except it isn't. The original draft of A New Hope reportedly included a stage direction, suggesting that Ben Kenobi should react to Solo's stupid attempt to impress them with obvious misinformation. Even during production, some involved with the film viewed the line as Han's bluster rather than factual navigation. This interpretation, that Solo was simply lying to seem impressive, persisted for years until George Lucas himself provided the authoritative canonical explanation. Lucas clarified that hyperspace travel within the Star Wars galaxy cannot occur in straight lines because vessels risk catastrophic collisions with celestial objects and gravitational anomalies. Plotting any course through hyperspace requires calculating jumps around obstacles and mass shadows. A ship equipped with a superior navigation computer, as the Millennium Falcon possesses, could chart more efficient routes by making shorter, quicker jumps, thereby reaching a destination faster while simultaneously covering less actual distance through space. The A.C. Crispin Han Solo trilogy novels elaborated on this framework substantially. According to Crispin's narrative, the Kessel Run involved smuggling spice, a recreational substance manufactured from the webs of space spiders, from Kessel's mines past Imperial tariff vessels. The standard smuggling route measured approximately 20 parsecs, making it among the galaxy's most dangerous runs. During one particular voyage, Han and Chewbacca were forced to take an emergency shortcut dangerously close to the Maw, a cluster of black holes that distort space-time itself. The massive gravitational distortions created by the Maw functioned as a natural shortcut. The Falcon's superior navigation computer successfully plotted a course covering less than 12 parsecs while simultaneously experiencing relativistic time dilation effects. Han and Chewbacca escaped through hyperspace safely, setting a new record in the process. This explanation transforms what appears to be a scientific error into evidence of sophisticated world-building that spans multiple media. A viewer who watches only A New Hope might reasonably question Solo's claim. A viewer who understands hyperspace mechanics and has engaged with Crispin's novels recognizes that Han accomplished an extraordinary and genuinely impressive navigational feat. The explanation has existed in print for decades, but YouTube critics don't read, they react. And here's another one that gets debunked constantly in comment sections, only to have another creator make the same mistake 6 months later. Obi-Wan Kenobi failing to recognize R2-D2. The logic seems airtight at first glance. R2-D2 served alongside Obi-Wan throughout the Clone Wars. The droid was Anakin's constant companion. R2 was present at the Jedi Temple during Revenge of the Sith. Yet, when Luke presents the astromech to Obi-Wan on Tatooine, the old Jedi responds with, "I don't seem to remember ever owning a droid." Plot hole, right? Wrong. Listen to the line again. Owning. Obi-Wan never owned R2-D2. The droid belonged to Padme Amidala's Naboo royal contingent, then served within Jedi Temple operations, then traveled with Anakin, but was never Obi-Wan's personal possession. Luke's question implies ownership. Obi-Wan can truthfully deny having owned this droid while being strategically misleading about whether he recognizes the unit. But here's what really gives it away. Later, aboard the Death Star, when Obi-Wan connects R2-D2 to a docking bay console, he casually remarks that the droid should be able to interpret the entire Imperial network. Think about that statement for a second. That's extraordinarily specific knowledge about this particular astromech's capabilities. A random unit wouldn't necessarily possess sophisticated Imperial network integration abilities. Obi-Wan knows exactly which droid he's dealing with. He's lying to protect Luke from learning too much too quickly. The same tactic he uses when claiming Vader betrayed and murdered Luke's father. The Marvel Star Wars comics published after Disney's acquisition provided additional canonical context. The interpretation that gained acceptance in post-2014 continuity circles posits that Obi-Wan deliberately feigns ignorance to sidestep conversational pathways that would lead to questions about Padme, Anakin's wife, the circumstances of Luke's birth, and the transformation of his father into Darth Vader. A characterization moment disguised as a continuity error, but you'd have to pay attention to catch it. Same deal with C-3PO. Anakin Skywalker built the protocol droid as a child on Tatooine. The Phantom Menace establishes this clearly. Yet when Vader encounters C-3PO serving Luke's allies in The Empire Strikes Back, he displays no acknowledgement of having constructed the unit, no recognition whatsoever of his own creation. A 9-page comic addressed this directly. Vader does recognize C-3PO, but chooses not to acknowledge the connection, consistent with his broader pattern of suppressing memories of his pre-Vader existence. The man who was Anakin Skywalker died on Mustafar. Vader doesn't reminisce about childhood projects. Stormtroopers can't aim. This one's been a meme since childhood for most fans. Imperial soldiers who can't hit targets standing directly in front of them. Comedic incompetence. Evidence that the Empire's military is fundamentally broken. Except when the canon is actually examined, a completely different picture emerges. During the Clone Wars, Imperial forces consisted of clone troopers, soldiers bred from the genetic template of Jango Fett, one of the galaxy's most accomplished bounty hunters. Superior combat training, genetic predisposition toward military skills inherited from a Mandalorian template. These clones received highly regimented combat training and possessed superior genetic predisposition toward military skills. But as the original clone population began failing due to artificially accelerated aging and limited lifespans, the Empire faced a logistics crisis. They needed massive soldier numbers to garrison conquered worlds across thousands of star systems. So they started cutting corners. Forcible recruitment, kidnapped children across occupied territories, dramatically reduced training standards designed to meet production quotas rather than ensure combat effectiveness. This transition meant stormtroopers appearing in the original trilogy films largely consisted of ordinary conscripts receiving minimal training, placed alongside career soldiers and professional officers in units of wildly varying quality. The overall quality of the Stormtrooper Corps deteriorated significantly under this system. Soldiers graduating from Imperial academies with lower assessment scores got assigned to planetary police duties, while only the most skilled warriors received placement with high-ranking officers or within Darth Vader's personal detachments. The E-11 blaster rifle they carry was specifically designed to sacrifice accuracy for increased stopping power against fortified targets. This weapon design philosophy meant that even highly skilled troops would struggle with precision at medium to long range using that weapon system. The E-11's design parameters prioritized overwhelming firepower over precision marksmanship, a trade-off that affects all users regardless of training level. And then there's the tactical explanation that changes everything about A New Hope. During the Death Star escape sequence, stormtroopers appear to constantly miss while pursuing Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewbacca through corridors and docking bays. Looks like incompetence, plays as comedy. But Darth Vader was actively hunting for the Rebel Alliance's hidden base. Vader deliberately commanded those stormtroopers to miss. The escape was a trap. A tracking device was planted on the Millennium Falcon. The poor aim that audiences mocked for decades represented an intentional military strategy executed under Vader's personal command authority. When statistical analysis examines these firefights, unadjusted Stormtrooper accuracy against the main cast sits around 2.47% in A New Hope. Adjusted for the intentional missing theory, 63.5%. In Return of the Jedi, Stormtrooper accuracy improved to approximately 9.09% against the main cast, even without adjustment. The Empire Strikes Back showed the lowest unadjusted rate at 0.96%. Significantly, this film features the highest concentration of firefights involving Luke Skywalker after his Force training on Dagobah, the most powerful Force user among the heroes at that narrative point. Not incompetent at all, executing orders perfectly. And that's before factoring in the Force itself. Luke's a powerful Force user by Empire Strikes Back. Leia has latent Force sensitivity confirmed in later films. Stormtroopers shooting at them are targeting supernatural opponents with Force-derived protection. In Rogue One, The Empire Strikes Back, and Star Wars Rebels, Force-sensitive individuals are depicted shielding their allies from blaster fire through Force-based defensive techniques. Accuracy against non-Force-sensitive targets elsewhere in the saga improves dramatically. One more from the original trilogy era. Darth Vader recognizes Luke as his son in The Empire Strikes Back, becoming obsessed with turning the boy to the dark side. Yet at the Battle of Yavin in A New Hope, Vader seems unaware of Luke's specific identity. He senses strong Force connection in one of the rebel pilots, but shows no recognition of a familial relationship. When did he find out? Marvel's 2015 Star Wars comic, Issue 6, bridges this gap with precision. Vader took the extraordinary step of hiring bounty hunter Boba Fett to investigate the rebel pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. Fett tracked Luke back to Tatooine, where the bounty hunter engaged Luke in direct combat. During this confrontation, Luke seized Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber from within a chest of relics and defeated Fett, forcing the bounty hunter to retreat in apparent failure. But Fett had succeeded in gathering one crucial piece of information: the pilot's name. When Fett returned to Vader aboard a Star Destroyer and reported that the young pilot was named Skywalker, Vader experienced immediate psychological crisis. The 25-issue Darth Vader solo comic series, written by Kieran Gillen, set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, reveals that Vader began extensive off-the-books activities behind the Emperor's back following this revelation. Gillen explained through the comics that Vader's deception of Palpatine began after discovering the Emperor had deliberately kept Luke's existence secret from him, establishing that the master-apprentice relationship contained deeper betrayals than the original films explicitly depicted. Canonical explanation, comic citation, specific issue number. The kind of research that takes 15 minutes, but most creators can't be bothered to do. The rule of two gets cited as a plot hole constantly. Yoda establishes in The Phantom Menace that always two there are, no more, no less, a master and an apprentice, regarding the Sith Order. Critics argue this creates confusion about Vader and Palpatine's plans for Luke. If the rule of two represents absolute Sith natural law, wouldn't Vader already understand that recruiting Luke would necessitate eliminating either himself or Palpatine? The 2008 novel Darth Bane, Rule of Two, reveals that the rule of two is far less literal than some have interpreted it as. Yoda presents the principle as though it were natural law governing Sith existence. But the novel establishes that the rule was actually created by Darth Bane as deliberate Sith policy designed to prevent infighting from destroying the Order. Not an absolute cosmic principle that physically prevents additional Sith from existing simultaneously. The Sith had historically suffered from internal conflict as multiple powerful darkside users schemed against each other, weakening the Order overall. Bane's rule was a strategic doctrine intended to concentrate darkside power and ensure each generation's apprentice eventually surpassed their master. Not mystical constraint, policy decision. The prequels get this treatment too. Why couldn't the Jedi sense that Palpatine was a Sith Lord? He was right there in the Senate building. Mace Windu met with him regularly. Yoda sat across from him in council chambers. How does an entire order of Force-sensitive monks miss the galaxy's most powerful dark side user sitting 10 feet away? The films actually address this directly, multiple times. Mace Windu states explicitly that the dark side clouds everything. Yoda confirms that the Jedi's ability to use the Force has diminished. The entire prequel trilogy depicts a Jedi Order suffering from institutional arrogance, political compromise, and spiritual blindness. They're not at the height of their power, they're at the end of a long decline. Palpatine didn't hide from clear-eyed mystics. He hid from a bureaucratized religious institution that had lost connection with its own teachings. The Tarkin novel by James Luceno elaborates further. Palpatine specifically cultivated techniques to mask his presence in the Force, drawing on Sith lore designed for exactly this purpose. The Sith had spent 1,000 years in hiding after Darth Bane instituted his reforms. They'd had a millennium to perfect the art of concealment from Jedi detection. Palpatine represented the culmination of that 1,000-year project. But sure, plot hole. The Jedi were just dumb. Now, let's talk about Leia. This one matters because viral videos dismiss the simplest possible explanation without engaging with it seriously. Leia's memory of her mother. The supposed plot hole that isn't. In Return of the Jedi, Luke asks Leia about her memories of their mother. Leia describes remembering someone beautiful and sad. Revenge of the Sith later established that Padme Amidala died giving birth to the twins immediately after delivery. Critics have spent nearly 2 decades arguing this creates an irreconcilable contradiction. How could Leia remember someone she knew for only moments as a newborn? Here's the thing. Leia had 2 mothers. Breha Organa was Queen of Alderaan. She held the title Minister of Education. Born Breha Antilles, she married Bail Organa, the senator who took custody of infant Leia at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Breha adopted Leia as an infant after the Clone Wars concluded, an adoption that received the blessing of Yoda himself. This means Breha was Leia's maternal figure from earliest infancy through young adulthood. She personally mentored select young Alderaanians, teaching them Alderaanian culture and heritage. She held the Rhindan sword alongside Leia during Leia's investiture ceremony as Crown Princess of Alderaan. Canon documents actual conflicts between them, including a Wobani incident that caused tension over Leia's impulsive behavior during missions. This was a real mother-daughter relationship spanning 19 years. Breha was beautiful. Alderaan was called the Planet of Beauty, its culture valuing art and nature above militarism, its citizens committed pacifists. George Lucas himself described Breha in December 2002 as a peaceful, trustworthy woman in her mid-30s. And as a founding member of the Alliance to Restore the Republic, watching her adopted daughter grow up in the shadow of galactic tyranny, she would have carried burdens that manifested as sadness. Beautiful. Sad. When Luke asks Leia about her mother, she describes memories of the woman who raised her, the woman who mentored her, the woman who held ceremonial swords at her princess investiture, the woman she knew intimately for 19 years before Alderaan's destruction. Not Padme, Breha. This isn't even a creative interpretation requiring elaborate justification. It's the obvious reading of the scene. Luke asks about your mother. Leia describes the only mother she consciously knew. The biological versus adoptive distinction matters to Luke, who's asking because he just learned they're siblings, but wouldn't necessarily frame Leia's response. She's answering naturally about the mother who raised her. Comment sections have pointed this out repeatedly in response to videos dismissing the explanation without consideration. Multiple threads asking why the creator didn't think about adoptive mothers for even 30 seconds before calling it a plot hole. Because thinking takes effort, and effort doesn't scale. But here's where it gets interesting. Let's take everything covered so far. The Kessel Run, Obi-Wan and R2-D2, C-3PO, Stormtrooper accuracy, Vader discovering Luke, the Rule of Two, Palpatine hiding from the Jedi, Leia's memories, and notice something about the timeline. All of these have explanations that existed before 2015. The A.C. Crispin novels, the Marvel comics, the reference books, the Darth Bane novel from 2008, the Tarkin novel by James Luceno. the original dialogue in the films themselves when you actually listen closely, reference books explaining universe mechanics, the incredible cross-section series detailing ship capabilities, Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy establishing how the galaxy worked beyond what films could show. These answers were always there. In what used to be called the Expanded Universe, now relabeled Legends, after Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm was completed in December 2012 and Lucasfilm declared the EU non-canon in 2014. Now let's talk about plot holes that don't have explanations. Force healing. Rey places her hands on a mortally wounded creature in The Rise of Skywalker and transfers her own life energy to heal it. Later, she uses this ability on Kylo Ren. It's presented as ancient Jedi knowledge from sacred texts she recovered from Ahch-To. If this ability existed in Jedi teachings, why didn't Anakin use it to save Padme? His entire fall to the dark side was motivated by desperation to prevent her death. Visions of Padme dying in childbirth drove him to seek forbidden knowledge. Palpatine seduced him specifically by promising secrets the Jedi didn't possess, the ability to save those he loved from death. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural, Palpatine tells him in Revenge of the Sith. But if Force healing was documented in sacred Jedi texts, texts that presumably existed in the Jedi Temple's archives when Anakin had access as a Jedi Knight, why would he need Palpatine's knowledge at all? The Jedi Temple archives were extensive. Anakin had access. If healing through the Force was an established light side technique written in ancient texts, Anakin's tragedy becomes a failure to use the library rather than a genuinely impossible situation requiring dark side solutions. This isn't a nitpick. It's a fundamental rewrite of what motivated the entire prequel trilogy's tragedy. No canonical source has explained how Force healing in The Rise of Skywalker reconciles with Anakin's desperate search for forbidden knowledge in Revenge of the Sith. Not the novelization, not the Visual Dictionary, not subsequent comics or reference books. The contradiction simply exists. Rey's training timeline. Luke trained under Yoda on Dagobah for what the film implies was weeks or months of intensive instruction. He still got his hand cut off by Vader. Obi-Wan trained for decades before facing significant combat. Even Anakin, presented as the most naturally gifted Force user in galactic history, trained for a decade before facing serious opponents. Rey defeats Kylo Ren in lightsaber combat in their first encounter. The Force Awakens takes place over what appears to be approximately 3 days from Rey's perspective. She goes from scavenger who thinks the Force is a myth to defeating a trained dark side warrior in direct combat within 72 hours. By The Rise of Skywalker, she's performing feats that took other Jedi decades to master, healing mortal wounds, projecting Force lightning, holding her own against Palpatine. The films offer one explanation. Rey is a dyad in the Force with Kylo Ren, connected across space and time in ways previous Jedi weren't. But this raises more questions than it answers. Why does being a dyad grant combat proficiency? There's no satisfying explanation in the novelizations, not in the Art of the Rise of Skywalker reference book, not in supplementary comics. The film simply asserts she's powerful and moves on. The map to Luke Skywalker. This one's been bothering viewers since December 2015 and still hasn't received satisfying resolution. Luke went into exile because he wanted to disappear. He went to the most unfindable Jedi temple in the galaxy, the first Jedi temple on Ahch-To, specifically to die in isolation. He wanted to end the Jedi and himself. The Last Jedi makes this explicit in dialogue. So why does a map to his location exist? Who made it? The film suggests it's a map to the first Jedi temple, which Luke went searching for. But Luke didn't want to be found. If he found the temple and wanted to vanish forever, why would he leave a map? Why would anyone create a map to a location whose whole purpose was being unfindable? If Lor San Tekka had this map, and Lor San Tekka was an old ally of the Resistance, why didn't he give it to Leia years earlier? He was apparently just sitting on Jakku with crucial intelligence, while the Resistance desperately needed Luke's help. The Force Awakens opening crawl states, Leia has sent her most daring pilot on a secret mission to Jakku. But if the map was this important and this accessible, the timeline of the First Order's rise makes no sense. The First Order's resources. The Empire built 2 Death Stars across decades using the industrial capacity of thousands of enslaved worlds. The Empire controlled the entire galaxy's manufacturing infrastructure, had access to unlimited conscript labor from subjugated populations, and required enormous time and resources for their superweapons. The First Order builds Starkiller Base, a weapon that converts an entire planet into a stellar energy gun capable of destroying multiple star systems simultaneously, while operating from the unknown regions in apparent secrecy. They did this in approximately 30 years, starting from scattered Imperial remnants fleeing into uncharted space. Where did the funding come from? The workforce? The raw materials? How did they hollow out an entire planet without anyone in the New Republic noticing? Starkiller Base is larger than either Death Star. The engineering required would have involved shipping more material than exists in most star systems. No explanation exists in any canonical source. The Visual Dictionary for The Force Awakens mentions that the First Order operated in the unknown regions, but doesn't explain how they obtained resources exceeding the entire Galactic Empire's capabilities while being a fraction of its size. Snoke. For 2 films, Snoke was presented as the mysterious dark side master who corrupted Ben Solo and commanded the First Order. Supreme Leader Snoke appears in The Force Awakens via hologram, projected at massive scale to suggest tremendous power. He trained Kylo Ren. He led the First Order's military operations. He was powerful enough in the dark side to create a force bond between Rey and Kylo across galactic distances. Who was he? Where did he come from? How did he rise to power in the aftermath of the Empire's collapse? The Force Awakens provided no answers. The Last Jedi killed him without explanation. The Rise of Skywalker revealed he was a clone puppet created by Palpatine, delivered as if this resolved anything. It raised more questions. How did Palpatine create a Force-sensitive clone? Where did Snoke's apparent personality and goals come from if he was just a puppet? Why did Snoke seem to have independent objectives that conflicted with what Palpatine presumably wanted? For 2 films comprising the first 2/3 of a trilogy, the central antagonist had 0 backstory. Not mysterious backstory that would be revealed later in a satisfying payoff. 0 backstory that was then replaced with an even more confusing backstory in the final film. The Knights of Ren, Kylo's personal strike team of dark side warriors. Introduced in a vision in The Force Awakens as masked figures standing in the rain surrounded by bodies, suggesting they'd committed some atrocity alongside Kylo during his fall to the dark side. 4 years and 3 films later, here's what the Knights of Ren did in the sequel trilogy. Stood around. Got killed in 1 fight scene. They appeared briefly in The Rise of Skywalker, and then Kylo Ren killed all of them in a single combat sequence. Supplementary materials gave them names and distinct weapons. None of this information appears in the films. No dialogue, no personalities, no exploration of their relationships with Kylo or each other, no explanation of their origins or how they joined the dark side. 3 films. Characters with elaborate backstories in supplementary materials. Nothing meaningful in the actual narrative. Finn's arc. The Force Awakens established him as a stormtrooper who defected because he couldn't stomach First Order atrocities. His conscience awakened during the assault on Jakku's village when he was ordered to slaughter unarmed civilians. He sees a fellow stormtrooper die in front of him, smears blood across his helmet, and decides he can't be part of this machine anymore. This premise promised something the franchise had never explored, a former insider whose knowledge could help the Resistance, whose moral journey would question whether redemption was possible for Imperial soldiers, whose trauma would reflect the human cost on both sides of the conflict. The Last Jedi gave him a subplot about arms dealers selling to both sides. The Rise of Skywalker reduced him to shouting, "Rey!" repeatedly while chasing her through action sequences. The Force sensitivity teased throughout the trilogy. What Finn kept trying to tell Rey before they sank in quicksand on Pisana never received payoff in the films themselves. Director J.J. Abrams confirmed in interviews that Finn was trying to confess he was Force-sensitive, but this information exists only in promotional interviews, not in the actual film. The most narratively rich new character introduction of the sequel trilogy became background support for Rey's story. 3 films, 0 resolution. Notice the pattern yet? Original trilogy plot holes, explained in books, comics, or careful viewing. Prequel trilogy plot holes, explained in novels, reference guides, or textual analysis. Sequel trilogy problems, unexplained, sometimes made worse by supplementary materials that contradict the films. Disney announced its acquisition of Lucasfilm in October 2012, with the deal closing on December 21, 2012. The Legends canon reset happened in 2014. The Force Awakens released in December 2015. The Rise of Skywalker released in December 2019. The timeline speaks for itself. The problem isn't Star Wars. The franchise had decades of writers filling gaps, building explanations, treating continuity like something that mattered. When the original trilogy seemed to have holes, the expanded universe patched them. When the prequels created apparent contradictions, reference books and novels reconciled them. A.C. Crispin explained the Kessel Run. Kieran Gillen's comics explained when Vader learned about Luke. The Darth Bane novels explained the rule of 2 wasn't mystical law. James Luceno's Tarkin novel explained how Palpatine hid from the Jedi. Someone cared. Multiple people cared. They built a universe where questions had answers if you were willing to look. The sequel trilogy broke that covenant. Questions don't have answers. Supplementary materials often contradict rather than clarify. The story group that was supposed to ensure continuity apparently didn't. The other problem is lazy content creators who don't respect either the source material or their audience's intelligence. They see a headline, Leia remembers her mother, but Padme died at childbirth, and they make a video instead of thinking for 30 seconds about whether Leia might be describing her adoptive mother. They see parsecs measure distance and congratulate themselves for remembering middle school astronomy instead of checking whether the actual franchise addressed this decades ago. They sort plot holes by dramatic impact rather than by era, so viewers never notice that all the real ones cluster after a specific corporate acquisition date. But the viewers notice. That's why comment sections on these videos fill up with corrections. That's why, strange, half of them are in the sequel trilogy, resonates with so many people. That's why lore gatekeepers and sequel critics can actually agree on something for once. The viewers who pointed out Brea Organa in comment sections were right. The viewers who noticed the sequel pattern were right. The viewers who corrected creators about the Kessel Run and Stormtrooper accuracy and Obi-Wan's strategic lying were right all along. The difference between a fake plot hole and a real one is 15 minutes of research and a timeline that divides suspiciously cleanly at December 2012. Now you have the receipts. Subscribe for more.